I didn't start out thinking I'd become the kind of person who weaponizes secrets. That probably sounds like the kind of thing everyone says right before admitting they did something terrible. But I mean it. At least I think I do. There wasn't some big turning point where I decided, yeah, blackmail sounds like a solid career move. It was slower than that. Messier. A series of small compromises that didn't feel like crimes at the time, until suddenly they were. This particular story starts about 3 years ago, when I was working a completely forgettable job in IT support for a mid-sized consulting firm. The kind of place where everyone smiles too much, drinks overpriced coffee, and pretends they're not quietly competing with each other. I wasn't important there. I reset passwords, recovered deleted files, fixed urgent printer issues that were never actually urgent. Invisible work. Which, as it turns out, is the best kind of job if you're going to start digging into people's lives. The thing about IT is, you see things. Not because you're snooping, not at first. Just because people are careless. They leave tabs open. They store files where they shouldn't. They reuse passwords. They trust the system, and by extension, the people who maintain it. People like me. The file came to me by accident. At least, that's what I told myself for a long time. A senior manager, let's call him Daniel, submitted a ticket. Said he'd lost access to a folder on the shared drive. Routine stuff. I logged in remotely, checked permissions, and started tracing the issue. Took maybe 5 minutes to fix. But before I closed the session, I noticed something odd. There was a subfolder inside his directory. Hidden. Not in a technical sense. It wasn't encrypted or protected, but it was named in a way that practically begged not to be opened. Something bland. Forgettable. Like archive_2019_miscellaneous. And yeah, I know. That should have been the moment I logged out and moved on. Instead, I clicked. I told myself it was part of the job. That I was making sure everything was working properly. That if something was broken inside that folder, I'd need to know. That was the first lie. Inside were a handful of documents, a few PDFs, and a compressed file. Nothing unusual, until I opened one of the PDFs. It wasn't work-related. Not even close. I won't get into the exact details yet, but it was enough to understand 2 things immediately. 1. This was deeply personal. 2. If anyone else saw it, Daniel's life would fall apart. I remember just staring at the screen, my hand hovering over the mouse, heart beating a little faster than it should have for something so quiet. That was the moment the idea first appeared. Not fully formed. Not a plan. Just a thought, quick, sharp, and easy to ignore. This could be useful. I should have closed the file right then. Instead, I kept reading. I didn't copy the files right away. That's something I've clung to, like it proves I had some kind of moral line left. I closed everything, fixed Daniel's access issue, logged out, and sat there staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. For a few minutes, I actually convinced myself it was over, that I'd seen something I shouldn't have, and I'd just move on. Except I didn't. The rest of that day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every ticket felt meaningless. Every conversation sounded distant. All I could think about was that folder sitting quietly on the server, like a loaded gun no one else knew existed. I started justifying it almost immediately. I told myself Daniel probably deserved it. People at his level always had skeletons. That's how they got there, right? I told myself I wasn't going to do anything, just make a copy, just in case. Like backing up data. Harmless. That was the second lie. The next morning, I came in early. No one around, just a low hum of machines and the cleaning staff finishing up. I logged into the system, navigated straight to his directory, and this time I didn't hesitate. I downloaded everything. It took less than a minute. A progress bar, a quiet click, and suddenly I had a piece of someone else's life sitting on my desktop. That was the moment things changed. Because once you have something like that, Real leverage. You stop seeing people the same way. They're not just coworkers anymore. They're possibilities. And Daniel? He wasn't just a manager anymore. He was my first test. Having the files didn't immediately make me bold. If anything, it made me paranoid. I kept them on an encrypted USB drive I bought with cash 2 days later, like I was already some kind of criminal mastermind instead of a guy who still ate instant noodles for dinner. I didn't open them again for a while. Just knowing they were there was enough to keep my thoughts occupied. But curiosity wins. It always does. One night, I plugged the drive into my laptop and went through everything carefully. No rushing this time. I read every document, checked metadata, dates, cross-referenced names. I needed to understand exactly what I had, and how bad it really was. It was bad. Not illegal in a clear, headline-grabbing way. That would have almost been easier. This was quieter, more corrosive. The kind of information that could ruin a marriage, end a career, fracture a reputation beyond repair. The kind of thing people would deny even when confronted with proof. Perfect leverage. That's when the planning started, not dramatic, not cinematic. Just small, controlled steps. I created an anonymous email account using a public Wi-Fi network across town. No personal devices, no traceable logins. I even drafted multiple versions of a message, testing tone more than content. Too aggressive, and he'd panic. Too soft, and he'd ignore it. I needed something in between, calm, precise, undeniable. The hardest part wasn't what to say. It was deciding whether I was actually going to send it. I rewrote the email at least 10 times. Every version felt wrong in a different way. Too threatening, and it sounded like a scam. Too vague, and it lacked weight. I realized pretty quickly this wasn't about intimidation, it was about credibility. Daniel needed to believe, instantly, that whoever was writing to him knew exactly what they had. So I changed tactics. Instead of making demands upfront, I attached a single file, just enough to prove the point. Not the worst one, but close. Something that would make his stomach drop without completely detonating his life if the message somehow leaked. Then I wrote 3 short paragraphs. No insults. No theatrics. Just facts, carefully chosen details, and one clear line: I have more. My hands were actually shaking when I hovered over send. Not from fear of getting caught, not yet, but from the weight of what it meant. Up until that moment, everything could still be undone. Files deleted, conscience restored, life back to normal. Once I sent it, that version of me was gone. I remember staring at the screen for a full minute after clicking. No dramatic sound. No alarm. Just silence. But something shifted. I wasn't just holding a secret anymore. I turned it into a weapon, and aimed it at someone. I expected panic. Immediate, frantic panic. What I got instead was silence. The first hour after I sent the email felt like sitting in a room with a ticking bomb you can't see. I kept checking the anonymous inbox, refreshing every couple of minutes like that would somehow force a reply to appear. Nothing. By the second hour, doubt started creeping in. Maybe it went to spam. Maybe he hadn't seen it yet. Or worse, maybe he had, and he was already talking to IT, tracing logs, asking questions. That thought made my stomach twist. I spent the rest of the workday acting normal, or at least trying to. Answering tickets, nodding through conversations, pretending I wasn't replaying every step in my head. Every time my phone buzzed or someone said my name, my pulse spiked. Daniel was in the office that day. I saw him twice. The first time, nothing seemed off. He was on a call, pacing slightly, same as always. But the second time, something had changed. He looked distracted, tense. Like he was carrying something heavy no one else could see. That's when it hit me. He'd read it. And suddenly, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the moment right before something breaks. He didn't reply until that night. 8:43 p.m. I remember the timestamp like it matters, like it explains anything. I was at home, laptop open, inbox already refreshed 100 times. When the message finally appeared, my chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. For a second, I just stared at the subject line, blank. No greeting, no hint of tone. Just nothing. I opened it anyway. 3 sentences. That's all he wrote. He didn't deny anything. Didn't ask who I was. Didn't threaten police or IT or anything I'd been half expecting. Instead, he went straight to the point. What do you want? That was it. Simple. Controlled. Almost calm. And that scared me more than panic would have. Because it meant he understood exactly what was happening. No confusion, no hesitation, just immediate acceptance of the situation. Like he'd already calculated the damage and decided negotiation was the best option. For a moment, I actually fell out of my depth. I'd spent days imagining this, planning, rehearsing, but now that it was real, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't actually know what I wanted. Money seemed obvious, but how much? Too little, and it wasn't worth the risk. Too much, and he might push back, or worse, involve someone else. I sat there for nearly an hour, cursor blinking, trying to decide the price of someone else's life unraveling. That's when it stopped feeling theoretical. Because whatever number I typed next would make me exactly who I'd been pretending not to be. I thought asking for money would feel powerful. It didn't. It felt calculated. Cold in a way I wasn't used to. Like I was stepping into a role I hadn't fully rehearsed. I started with numbers in my head, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Each one felt arbitrary. What's the market value of someone's reputation? Their marriage? Their sense of control over their own life? There's no guidebook for that. I settled on a number that made my pulse jump just thinking about it. 15,000. Not life-ruining for him, but significant enough to hurt. Enough to make this real. I typed the reply slowly. Kept the same tone he used, short, direct, emotionless. No threats, just implication. I outlined the amount, a deadline, and a basic instruction. I'd provide details for payment once he agreed. Before sending, I read it 5 times. Deleted one sentence that sounded too aggressive. Rewrote another to sound more certain. Confidence mattered here, even if it was fake. Then I hit send. This time, the adrenaline came after. A sharp rush, like stepping off a ledge and realizing halfway down there's no taking it back. The weird part? A small piece of me expected him to refuse. To push back, call my bluff, escalate. But deep down, I already knew he wouldn't. Because people don't gamble when they know they've already lost. He didn't negotiate. That should have been my first warning sign. His reply came faster this time, 10 minutes, maybe less. Just one line. Agreed. Tell me how. No hesitation. No attempt to lower the amount. Nothing. At first, I felt a surge of relief. This was working. Too well, actually. The plan I'd pieced together in fragments was suddenly moving faster than I'd anticipated. And that's where things started to slip. Because agreeing on a number is one thing. Actually moving that kind of money without leaving a trail? That's a different game entirely, and I was nowhere near as prepared as I thought I was. I'd done some reading, sure. Forums, articles, vague advice about anonymity. Cash drops, cryptocurrency, prepaid cards. It all sounded simple when you weren't the one making the call. Now I had to choose. Anything digital risked leaving a trace. Anything physical meant exposure, cameras, witnesses, mistakes. I spent hours going back and forth, second-guessing everything. Eventually, I chose what felt like the safest middle ground, prepaid debit cards. Easy to buy, hard to trace, at least in theory. I sent him instructions. Specific ones? Multiple cards, purchased at different locations, codes sent in parts. When I hit send, I expected things to stabilize again. Instead, I felt something new creeping in. Not fear exactly. More like the realization that I was improvising in a situation where mistakes don't stay small. The next 2 days dragged in a way I can't really explain unless you've been stuck waiting for something that could change your life. Or end it. Daniel didn't reply right away after I sent the payment instructions. That silence came back, heavier this time. It wasn't just anticipation anymore. It was doubt layered with paranoia. Every scenario started running through my head again, only now they were worse. What if he changed his mind? What if he went to the police after all? What if the delay meant someone was already tracing things back to me? By the second evening, I was barely sleeping. Every notification made my heart jump. I even started avoiding looking at Daniel in the office, which in hindsight probably made me look more suspicious than anything else. Then, finally, the email came. Short again. Controlled. He said he'd done exactly what I asked. Included partial codes, just like I instructed, split across multiple messages sent minutes apart. Careful. Deliberate. I checked them one by one. They were real. That moment, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like crossing a line I could suddenly see very clearly behind me. Because now it wasn't just a threat anymore. I had actually taken something from him. And there was no version of this where I could pretend otherwise. I didn't redeem the cards immediately. That might sound strange, but after confirming the codes were valid, I just sat there, staring at the screen, rereading the numbers like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less real. 15,000. Split across multiple prepaid cards, exactly how I'd instructed. Clean. Careful. Done. I should have felt relief. Maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt exposed. Because up until that point, everything had existed in this strange in-between: plans, messages, possibilities. Now there was proof. A transaction. Something tangible that tied me to what I'd done, even if no one else could see it yet. Eventually, I forced myself to act. I used different machines, different locations. Redeemed small amounts at a time, spreading it out over hours. Every step felt mechanical, rehearsed, even though it wasn't. I kept my head down, avoided cameras as much as I could, second-guessed every movement. It was exhausting. By the end of it, the money was mine. And that's when something unexpected hit me. Not guilt. Not yet. Just a hollow kind of realization. The moment I'd been building toward was already over. And it didn't feel anything like I thought it would. I told myself it was over. That was part of the agreement, even if it was never explicitly written. He pays, I disappear, and whatever I found stays buried. Clean ending. No loose threads. For about 3 days, I actually believed that. I stopped checking the anonymous inbox. I avoided his directory at work. I even started thinking about normal things again: bills, weekend plans, dumb distractions. Life trying to reset itself. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't guilt, not in the way people describe it. I wasn't losing sleep over what I'd done. If anything, I was sleeping better now that the tension was gone. No, this was different. It was awareness. Every time I saw Daniel in the office, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way he carried himself, a little tighter now. The way he checked his phone more often. The way conversations around him seemed slightly more guarded. I'd changed something fundamental for him. And here's the part one didn't expect. It made him more interesting to me. That scared me more than anything else so far. Because instead of wanting distance, I felt curiosity creeping back in. Not about the files, I already knew those, but about him. About how far this could go. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Getting away with it didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel capable. Curiosity is dangerous when you've already crossed the line. I started small, just checking logs I had no real reason to check anymore. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger alerts. Just looking. Telling myself it was harmless, that I was making sure everything stayed quiet. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is, I wanted to see if Daniel had told anyone. If there were signs, unusual access requests, security audits, anything that suggested I wasn't as invisible as I thought. At first, there was nothing. Then I noticed a pattern. A few internal security tickets had been opened over the past week. Routine on the surface, permission reviews, access logs, minor audits. The kind of things that happen all the time. Except these were all connected to shared drives. To directories like his. That's when the first real wave of fear hit me. Not the sharp adrenaline from before, but something heavier. Slower. The kind that settles in your chest and doesn't leave. I told myself it could be coincidence. Companies run audits all the time. But then I saw one ticket that mentioned unauthorized access review. No names. No specifics. Still, it felt personal. For the first time since this started, I wasn't thinking about control or leverage. I was thinking about exposure. And how little it might actually take for everything to unravel. Once you start looking for threats, you see them everywhere. I tried to act normal, but my routine shifted without me meaning to. I logged out of systems faster. Avoided unnecessary access. Even my posture at my desk changed, like someone might somehow see what I'd done just by the way I sat. Daniel, though, he changed more. He wasn't panicked. That would have been easier to read. Instead, he became controlled in a way that felt deliberate. Fewer casual conversations. More closed-door meetings. He started looping in IT on things he never used to care about. Permissions, access reports, audit trails. That wasn't random. That was someone tightening the perimeter. One afternoon, he even stopped by my desk. Nothing unusual on the surface, just a question about a shared folder issue. But the way he looked at me lingered a second too long. Not accusing. Evaluating. I answered normally. Maybe too normally. Kept my tone steady, explained the issue, fixed it while he watched. Every second stretched. When he left, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. He didn't know it was me. But he knew someone close to the system had done it. And I was standing much closer to that line than I'd been pretending. It didn't explode all at once. No dramatic confrontation, no security dragging me out, no instant collapse. It was quieter than that, almost subtle enough to miss if I hadn't already been on edge. They scheduled a department-wide audit review meeting. Mandatory. That word alone was enough to make my stomach drop. Everyone in IT was called in, along with a few managers, including Daniel. The room felt tighter than usual, like the air had been turned down a notch. People were talking, joking even, but it all sounded forced to me. Then the presentation started. Access logs. Security protocols. A general talk about recent irregularities. No specifics, but enough detail to make it clear something had triggered this. My focus narrowed to every slide, every word, trying to read between lines that might not even be there. And then came the part that hit. They mentioned unauthorized access tied to internal credentials. Not external. Not a breach. Someone inside. I kept my face still. Nodded when others nodded. Took notes I didn't need. But inside, everything tightened. Because for the first time, this wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was an active investigation. And I was sitting in the room with people trying to find someone like me, while pretending I wasn't exactly that person. I wasn't caught. At least, not in the way you'd expect. The audit dragged on for weeks. Logs were reviewed, permissions tightened, a few people got quietly questioned. I was careful, more careful than I'd ever been about anything in my life. Covered gaps I didn't even know I'd left. Acted normal until, normal, felt like a performance I couldn't turn off. Eventually, things settled. No accusations. No final reveal. Just a gradual return to routine, like the whole thing had been absorbed into the system and filed away as resolved. Daniel never contacted me again. We passed each other in the office sometimes. Nods. Neutral expressions. Whatever had happened between us existed in a space no one else could see, and that we both pretended wasn't there. I left the company a few months later. Different job, different environment. Clean slate on paper. But here's the truth I don't like admitting. Getting away with it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a door opening. Because now I know how easy it is. How small the first step can be. How quickly you can justify the next one. If you're reading this thinking you'd never do something like this, good. Hold on to that. Because the dangerous part isn't becoming someone like me overnight. It's realizing, too late, that you already did.